You're on.
Yeah, is this it? Am I? Okay, I guess so. Good evening and welcome to the June 28th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Before we start, we want to apologize to those who were here last month, anticipating that they would have completed their task, but fortunately we didn't have a quorum, but you can see tonight we do, so we will commence to have our regular meeting. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. First of all, does anybody on the commission have any conflict of interest? All right. I'd like, because we don't have minutes from last meeting, but we have minutes from the meeting before the 26th of April. They still have to be approved. So can I have a motion to do that, please?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Becky, can you do the roll?
Board Member Kaiser?
Yes.
Board Member Smith?
Yes.
Board Member Bennett?
Yes.
Board Member Vega?
Yes.
Chair Gordon?
Yes.
Thank you, it passes.
Okay. We have no postponements. Before we get into the items that we have this evening, is there anybody in the chamber who wishes to speak? It can speak on anything as long as it doesn't pertain to items that are on the agenda. Anyone wishes to talk? Okay, then we can dispose of that. All right, first item on the agenda then is consent agenda. We have item 6.1, Sonoma Ranch, North Phase and Subdivision Preliminary Plat. Can I have a motion, please? Somebody.
I motion. I'm sorry, I missed the full extent of that.
I need a second.
So I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
And I second.
Okay. Becky, please.
Board Member Kaiser?
Yes.
Board Member Smith?
Yes.
Board Member Bennett?
Yes.
Board Member Vega?
Yes.
Chair Gordon?
Yes.
Passes.
Okay. Then we move to old business. We have item 7.1, which is the 1390 Monte Vista Infill Development Request. Can I have a motion, please? I said I need a motion on item 7.1.
I make a motion to approve item 7.1.
And a second?
I second. Commissioner Smith.
Becky?
Mr. Chairman,
You-
point
you
of
have
order.
to
Do you
have
want a presentation on that?
I'm sorry?
Would you like a presentation
Yes.
on that? Okay.
Yes. But I want to just get a vote on my second.
I'm sorry?
I'd like to get a vote on my second for this item.
Discussion.
Well, not the vote, just to bring it up on the agenda. Okay, fine, go ahead, Vince.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Vincent Benegas, interim planner for the record, here this evening to present the case. In this case, it's an infill development process case for 1390 Monte Vista Avenue. It involves an 8-unit apartment complex. The property is currently zoned R2, which again is our multifamily low-density residential district. It does involve 2 vacant undeveloped parcels, and those being lots 12 and 13 of the Sage Addition re-subdivided 504 subdivision. Name you're not likely to see anytime in our future. This was done back in 1959. And the properties fall within our infill development boundary, and because they are undeveloped, they are qualifying parcels. The combined acreage is 0.315 acres, and we see the location of these subject parcels. They're outlined in red here along Monte Vista Avenue. If I can orient you, Solano Drive is here, Plain Street to the south of the subject properties. You have R2 zoning, again, our multifamily low-density district immediately east and immediately south of the subject property. You also have R2 designated parcels north of the subject property, and beyond that, some R3, R1A. And as you start delving south and southwest of the subject property, you start getting into what we call our university district. In this case, you have areas identified as UDTZ. That's our transition zone that allows some single-family, multifamily, and some limited commercial office type uses. And then further south is your UD-UAZ, which is University Avenue Zone, which increases the level of density and intensity that you could be allowed to have. The aerial map shows the subject property and again shows it as vacant as indicated. You do have various uses, single-family uses off to your east and southeast. You do have some duplexes and some smaller apartment units to the south. Larger apartments due north of the subject property here and located here. And you also have some townhomes that were developed northeast of the subject location. Elsewhere on the, looking further west, you do have some single family, and again, you start seeing more duplex type units as well. And the closer you get to the university property is when you start seeing a plethora of residential uses, a mix of uses, as we know. So the proposal this evening is to consider an 8-unit apartment complex. There will be developed as 2 buildings, if you will, 2 fourplex buildings consisting of a total of 8 units on lots 12 and 13, so 4 on each lot. The deviations under consideration with this infill include the fact that the applicant does not wish to replat the 2 properties into one, which is typically required but not always necessary, depending on how development is to take place. There's also a 2-foot backup aisle deviation to the 27-foot backup aisle required for parking stalls. In this case, it affects 7 of the 12 stalls that they'll have on site. And so the backup aisle as a result of that deviation is 25 feet instead of the 27. There's also a density deviation of approximately 10 dwelling units per acre. So as proposed, they're seeking 25 dwelling units per acre on the 2 parcels in question. And there's a 4-unit maximum based on the density allowance that is also a deviation. So 4, in addition to the 4 they're allowed to have, equals your 8 units. Along the side yard, which I'll show you here in a minute on the site plan, there's a 2-foot side yard setback deviation to the 7 feet required, so that would result in a 5-foot side yard setback. The individual units themselves are designed to be 2 stories each. They're approximately 1,060 square feet in size, and again, the fourplex configuration. The units will share ingress and egress to the property, parking and drainage, and as a result of that, they will have to enter into a shared agreement for all 3 of these elements if those properties are to remain separate. That specific element can be handled at the permitting stage, and so is not a significant issue for us here this evening. There are 4 additional bicycle parking racks to the 2 that are required. Those are for substitution for 1 auto parking stall that could not be accommodated. And the landscape along the front of the property, there's a row of landscaping that is being proposed to help shield some of the parking that you'll see from the roadway. It is limited, but nonetheless an attempt to help soften the look, if you will, from that perspective. With that landscaping, they will have to be cognizant of the fact that there's some clear sight triangles to the ingress-egress element of their access to the property, so they'll have to be aware of that and account for that. And so that might lessen some of that landscaping, but it shouldn't be significant. Other than that, all other code requirements are to be followed and are considered as part of this proposal. So this is the site plan that, believe it or not, this is one or the last iteration of about 3 that we looked at. The reason why this didn't go at an earlier meeting is at the time we drew closer to the subject meeting several months ago, staff was still trying to manipulate the site plan and consider alternatives to what you see here. I indicated that there were some landscaping that is to be located here along Monte Vista Lane, and as a result of that width of landscaping, that's what affects the backup aisles for these subject parking stalls here, and that's where you get into the 25-foot backup aisle instead of the 27-foot as shown here. These are the drainage ponds, this one, and right here in this corner that will be shared amongst the 2 properties. This is a common courtyard, and the configuration of these units, keeping in mind there's 2 stories each unit, was to allow some privacy in terms of the access to them so that they're not just in a linear accessible fashion kind of thing. And you have your bike racks here, and this is the side of the property where the 2-foot deviation to the side yard setback exists, so that's going to be 5 feet instead of the 7. Everything else is compliant. With some of the earlier iterations, we tried to force these buildings up front to Monte Vista, but we had several limitations. Number one, the configuration of the structures. This is the design element the applicant wanted to try and retain in terms of how they are accessed, keeping in mind there were 2 stories. Initially, staff thought, well, we can stack them up and move them up and still have plenty of room for parking. But because they're 2 stories, that limited what we could do. We did have one design that kind of separated the units as far apart as possible, allowing some access in the middle. That access was very limited in width, and so this seemed to be, at least from the perspective of access, one of the more favorable site plans that we can come up with given those limitations. There's no alleyway in the back that could have been used. That would have been another deviation from code, but that could have allowed some flexibility in design. But again, this is what we came up with as a result of working with the applicant. A couple of drawings illustrating some of their facades, both the front facade and side facades, etc. In terms of analysis, staff felt that the proposal was not out of character with the surrounding area. You do have a multitude of apartments of various shapes and sizes in the neighborhood. And the area is in a state of transition. You do still have some properties that are trying to maximize some of the development potential of the R2 zone. So from that perspective, we didn't feel what was being proposed was something out of character with the area. And there were no health, safety, or welfare issues identified as part of the review process with this request. Public notice was provided pursuant to code Surrounding property owners were notified, and staff did not receive any input on this case. So even, as of tonight, I have not received anything. So staff recommendation is approval based on findings, the following findings. Number one, the vacant property is within the infill development overlay, making it eligible for the infill development process, which is what is considered this evening. It also promotes alternative housing types and styles and living arrangements that the comprehensive plan speaks to. It also encourages a denser housing option within the urban neighborhood which it is located within, and is supported by other various goals, policies, and actions of our Elevate Las Cruces comprehensive plan. So in addition to meeting the Elevate comprehensive plan purpose and intent, it is compatible with the zoning of the area. It's compatible with land uses in the area, and it certainly meets the intent as purpose and intent as outlined in our 2001 zoning code. It does fulfill the city's infill policy plan and is compliant with the criteria for decisions identified in the municipal code. So your options this evening, commissioners, is to vote yes and approve the request. You may vote no and deny it and provide findings of fact of your own that are different than those presented this evening. You may vote yes with conditions or vote to table. And that concludes staff's presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. The applicant's representative is also in attendance and will be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there any questions from the commission? Commissioner Kaiser.
Thank you. I have a question about the parking situation that maybe you could clarify. So my understanding is the requirement is for 12 spots or 12 parking stalls, and I count 11 plus the handicap stall, which would equal 12. Is that?
That's correct. And they're also providing additional bike facilities, racks to, as an addition to parking. There's an allowance to require 4 bicycle in lieu of the 1 parking. So they meet the parking as shown on the site plan.
Yeah, I guess I'm confused because the requirement is for 12 spots, and they have 12 spots, correct?
They have, let's see, 12 stalls. That's correct. They do.
So as proposed, they're not actually.
Correction, Commissioner Kaiser, they have 11. This is the ADA loading for van accessibility. So that's not technically a parking, even though it's shown as 8 feet, which is a requirement of our code. And so the 12th would come in the form of the substitution by the bicycle facility.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's not actually a handicap parking stall. It's just for loading, unloading?
One of those will serve as ADA van accessible stall.
Okay. And then I guess, is it my understanding that off or on-street parking could be substituted for the parking requirement? Was that looked at in this particular situation?
The applicant and staff did look at that as an opportunity. However, in that they were able to meet some of the demands and the parking requirements as stipulated. They didn't go there, but certainly with any overflow or visitors or that type of thing, they would take full advantage of the on-street parking. But there's no attempt to utilize that as a substitution for on-site.
Okay, and in the back and forth and compromises about site design, that was never explored as an opportunity to help with some of the things that you've discussed earlier?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, staff did look at that. In fact, one of the comments from staff is whether or not we would support, a considerable adjustment to the on-site parking requirements by allowing on-street. There are limitations to that, and I think there's a percentage of parking, on-site parking, that can be substituted for on-street. So that is another element, but certainly with the infill, that could have been accommodated as a deviation. It's just that this was ultimately the site plan that both the applicant was happy with, and based on the give and take, staff felt comfortable presenting at least.
Okay, thank you. And then on the landscaping component of it, so we have that 2-foot strip along the sidewalk and the parking driveway area. Are there any requirements or proposals to put at least 1 or 2 street trees there?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, this row of landscaping was just merely intended to provide some visual relief. They are looking at, we talked about some street trees, but given the width of the landscape area, they're probably going to be more along the lines of the cypress variety. But you do have opportunities, and we talked about that, to provide some landscaping in these limited ponding areas, but the site will comply with the 15% requirement of our landscape ordinance. This is just showing that row to, again, soften the parking area.
Okay, thank you. And then I think I have a couple of questions on the replatting. So if they were to replat, would they still require an IDP for overall density?
Yes, the considerations, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, the considerations for the numbers you saw in this presentation accounted for both of the properties being used as one. So,
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Is there anyone else? I have a couple.
yes, sir.
Number one, I don't see any provision on this plan, and it's sort of difficult to read sometime, for refuse. Where are they putting their dumpsters?
The dumpster location was discussed, and last I heard is they will be looking at some individual bins, not necessarily a community bin, and have the individuals wheel them out just like many of us do every pickup day. But that will be investigated at the permit level and with utilities.
Okay, I'm sure that the builder or the owner of the apartments will handle that.
Yep.
And on the packet that you provided, there are apparently 2 contingencies here on the back. One of them about landscaping, which Commissioner Kaiser may have taken care of with shared parking and landscaping. This other one with traffic, is that just normal? Will be taken care of at time of permitting?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's see. That's it for me.
Okay.
Is there, the applicant wish to say anything? Okay, is there anyone from the audience who wishes to speak? If not, then we can take a vote. Could I have a motion, please?
Make a motion to approve a vote.
We already have a motion and a second for this, sir?
So you're putting the question up.
Yeah.
So now we're going to have a second vote and a second?
Hold on,
What was the first?
Okay, then I do need a motion on this item. No, I don't think she heard you if you did.
I make a motion to approve 7.1.
I second the motion.
Board Member Kaiser?
Yes, based on staff's recommendation and consistency with Elevate Las Cruces.
Board Member Smith?
Yes, based on staff recommendation.
Board Member Bennett?
Yes, based on staff recommendation, site survey meets Elevate Las Cruces and the neighborhood character.
Board Member Vega?
Yes, based on staff recommendation, and it meets Elevate Las Cruces.
Chair Gordon?
Yes, I vote yes, based on staff recommendations. My site visit does comply with Elevate Las Cruces, and it does do something for the infill problem. So thank you.
Passes.
All right, then under new business, item 8.1, the Melinda Street infill development request.
Okay, so Vincent Benegas, interim planner for the record. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, presenting the case this evening, which is another infill development process request for property located at 585 and 595 Melinda Street. The proposed use is an adult daycare with ancillary uses, and I will go through that here. So under current conditions, we have both addresses consisting of 3 properties as per the assessor records that are currently, the properties are developed, but the buildings are vacant. And they were originally designed as single-family dwellings back upon their construction, and as such, they're considered underutilized in that they're vacant today and have been for a bit. The 3 lots involved in the request involve lots 3, 4, and 5. The subject subdivision, in this case, it's La Lomita subdivision 388. The 4 and 5, lots 4 and 5 comprise 595 North Melinda Street, and lot 3 comprises 585 North Melinda Street. The properties are within the infill development boundary, and because, again, they are underutilized, they are qualifying parcels for the IDP. The properties themselves are zoned AD03, that's our Alameda Depot overlay designation area 3, which is our core residential area. And it refers to the underlying zone. In this case, it's R1A, which is our single-family medium density, much like many of the properties you see that are developed with single-family homes on them throughout the city. The 8003, in this case, is pursuant to the Alameda Depot overlay in our zoning code, has restrictions on commercial and industrial uses and limits those to any qualifying use, non-residential use that falls within our home occupation and live-work type of arrangement. The total acreage, or the combined acreage of all property involved, is 0.438 acres. And the zoning map that is being shown here identifies the parcels outlined in red, this being 595, the larger, and 585 is the smaller. You have Melinda Street located here going up to Picacho Avenue, and if you go southward, eventually you'll be intersecting with Hadley and Lowman and Amador. You have Mountain Avenue here, does dead end at this location, and you have Pittsburgh Avenue just to the south of the block where the 2 properties are located. There is a cul-de-sac within this immediate block, Bonita Circle, but you have much of the core area, the 8003 area identified here, and many of the underlying zone that you see is R1A. There is some R2 and some other underlying designations, but they're all within the 8003, again, our residential core. To the north of the subject property, you have 8004, and that is are area that allows for both single-family, multifamily, and very limited office commercial type uses. In this case, this property is Lions Park, has, of course, the aquatic or the swimming pool component, tennis courts, and often this area is handball courts. You do have a mixture of residential styles, a lot of them being single-family in nature. Further west, you have R2 zone properties after the railroad tracks, which are located here. And again, you have single-family, and I'm sure some are in transition, being duplexes, et cetera. You have 8006 down below. It's a small strip of land use that's designated or considered to be our railroad sub-district, if you will. And that allows more dense residential uses that are provided as part of a mixed-use component. So it's not heavy on the uses unless it's mixed-use component or design. But it does allow greater flexibility in terms of commercial and then some limited industrial uses. Our aerial map shows the same properties outlined in red. Again, the two lots that make up this larger home site is here, and 585 is located here. So the proposal is, as indicated, an adult daycare and ancillary support uses, all of which are considered commercial. Again, one of the deviations as part of this request. But both properties will be used in conduct of the proposed business. Other than improvement to the exterior facades, there won't be any significant exterior building modifications that would indicate it's something other than, to the extent possible, a single-family home. They're trying to blend in with the neighborhood and trying to keep it as low-key as possible, if you will, but still account for the fact that they are commercial use and they need to be identified as such. So they will be seeking a small ground sign as part of their proposal. Staff is recommending that it not be illuminated to be in keeping with the neighborhood. There are some restrictions in the sign code related to that. So existing on-site parking and proposed on-street parking is being considered with this request. The proposal falls one stall short of meeting their requirements. There are some interesting alignments as it relates to the requirements, but there is a drop-off pickup for clients in front of the 595 North Melinda's address. 3 bicycle parking facilities are required and 1 ADA van accessible, which they will be able to provide on site. Ultimately, they're looking at a maximum at any given time, maximum of 50 clients proposed for the daycare staffed or proposed for the daycare, and that may sound like a lot, but we got to keep in mind that they're going to grow with the business, and at any point in time it is very unlikely that they will have 50 clients, because the nature of the business is to either drop off clientele. If I have a parent, for instance, and I'm in need of attending a meeting in the evening, but I'm the caretaker, I would be able to within the hours of operation drop off my parent and be on my way. So you're not going to likely see 50 clients coming in at any given time. So I just want to kind of clarify that. There will be some staffed or a staffed commercial kitchen, and the idea being that when you drop off your family member, if they are in need of a meal, they will have a chef on site or a cook on site to prepare whatever dish the client wishes to have. So there will be facilities for that service, and they won't be allowed to cook, but there will be someone there to cook for them. There will be 2 massage therapy stations and 2 hair salon barber stations. And again, these are just for the clients. It's not for anyone just coming in to see what it's all about. So the daycare will operate Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 6. The massage and hair salon barber component of that will also operate from a 7:30 to 6 p.m. Time frame, but they are being split in terms of days of the week. So your massage is Tuesday and Thursday, again, following the daycare hours. And the hair salon and barber is Monday and Wednesday. So the intent is not to combine all the commercial activity at the same time. It's trying to, again, limit the operation beyond which is reasonable for the neighborhood. It's a security-minded operation, and I was informed that some of their rules, their operation will require that a wristband be provided that will help monitor when a client, if they are so inclined to tend to leave the facility, there will be some method to track them and notify staff of the potential exit of the client. To try and bring to mind operation that is security-minded. They will also follow a 1-to-5 staff to client ratio as required by state requirements. So there's, at any given time, in keeping with the 50 requirement, 15 staff at max. And again, there will probably be double duty in some sense with some of the other commercial activities taking place and those that run them. So you will have, in summary of the deviations, 3 commercial land uses going on, daycare, massage, salon, barber. There's a request not to replat the lots into a single lot, and 1 auto parking lot to the 15 required will be lacking, and of course a request for the ground sign. So this is the site plan that they provided. It's a bit of an aerial shot as well. Disregard some of the dimensioning in terms of appearance. They've got the actual numerics correct, but there is a series of parking lots, or parking spaces, I should say, right along Mountain Avenue. That's an existing driveway for this residence once upon a time. They will be utilizing some tandem parking arrangement. Here's 2 others. Obviously, these will be intended for staff so that they can communicate and work together and ensure that ingress and egress to these stalls can be accommodated easily. There will be some additional on-street parking here. In fact, you see 3 along Mountain Avenue. You see 1 beginning near the intersection of Melinda and Mountain. Here is the pickup loading zone for clients at the main facility. And you see 3 other on-street stalls here and 2 via the parking or the driveway for what used to be the 585 residents at this location. The yards will be shared. In fact, you can tell that this rear yard of this house is rather limited, but they will be utilizing and having easy access to this rear yard as part of their outdoor activity offerings, gardening and things like that, even some limited physical activity as well. These are photos of what we see today. Once upon a time, they were a little bit, or I should say far more vibrant. The landscaping, the grass, everything was alive and green. And throughout the years, the homes kind of took on a different look. They eliminated, obviously, one of the entrances here, painted them white. They were quite beautiful homes at one point in time. This is the other site, the 595 site. It's a very large structure, but they had trees in the front, again, grass, etc. And throughout the years, much of that has died. And they're looking to bring some of that back and bring these structures back to active use as part of this infill request. In terms of analysis, again, the proposal seeks to be as compatible as possible with the neighborhood character. There were no health, safety, or welfare issues that were identified as part of this request. And Melinda Street is designated as a major collector. So the concern that might be voiced in terms of the roadway not being able to carry any capacity beyond which may be seen out there today. I think the collector roadway designation can allay some of those concerns. It's a unique street, and I must admit, early on, I was concerned about the potential for traffic impacts. So I asked the applicant's representative to go out and kind of randomly monitor traffic and do, it was a simplistic traffic count, but nonetheless just to gauge what they saw. And the numbers were quite telling. It's a little bit more active than your typical local road, but it's not significant. And so that kind of allayed some of my concerns regarding that. The proposal itself, in that it is a daycare, is not entirely out of line with past history. In terms of some of the earlier uses, it was used for, and let's see, I think we had, if I could remember their name. Yes, Victory Outreach was there, and before that it was approved as kind of a halfway house early on in the process. So the history is there. What they're proposing today is kind of in line with that. It is far more activity for any typical home in the area, but nonetheless something that doesn't fall necessarily in line with permanent residential use, at least with this request. The proposal does provide a use that is similar to the Senior Citizen Center concept, but is a little different in terms of the service provided and the personnel care aspect, etc. Public notice, the applicant's representative did send out early notification to the neighborhood back in March of this year, and several property owners, as a result of that effort, have voiced support. There were, I think, one at minimum and maybe a few that opposed the proposal, but a vast majority were in favor of it. Some even indicating that this type of use was long overdue. So the city notice was sent out in accordance with our zoning code, and other than the input that was received by the applicant's representative, staff was not directly contacted in terms of input on this case. So staff recommendation is to conditionally approve the case. The conditions being that lots 4 and 5, that's for the larger lot. The single-family home straddles the property line. It is very unlikely that that will either be, at any time, be separated to create 2 separate lots. So staff feels that those 2 lots should be replatted into one. The 585 lot can still be a standalone lot. So in terms of that condition, if they follow through with it, if it is voted on by this commission, you will have 2 lots instead of the 3. The applicant shall satisfy all fire review comments prior to the issuance of a permit or certificate of occupancy as applicable. That's kind of a given, but there were some concerns, and I know the applicant had addressed all the concerns to the best of my knowledge, so that's kind of just a provision that I felt could be included. And then the IDP satisfy the ADA van accessible parking requirement on-site as applicable to our code. So those were the three conditions that staff would like for you to consider. The findings of fact are that the property falls within the infill development overlay, making it eligible for this process. The land use and community service that they're looking to provide is not specifically available within our city and is a good addition to providing care for our aging family members. And the proposed IDP seeks the elderly caretaker services while trying to maintain consistent or compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. Again, they're trying to blend in, not stand out. And there are various Elevate Las Cruces Comprehensive Plan goals, policies, and actions that support the request. So here's the information. I kind of jumped the gun. Victory Outreach, as I indicated, had used the facility, and there was an earlier approval as a group home back in the day. So in addition to meeting the Elevate Las Cruces plan, it's compatible with the land uses and zoning districts in the area. It meets the city's infill policy plan and provisions outlined in the municipal code in terms of purpose and intent of decisions, et cetera. So that concludes staff's presentation. Your options this evening are to vote yes and approve the request, to vote no and deny the request and provide findings to the contrary of what staff has presented this evening. Vote yes with conditions, and keep in mind staff has identified 3 conditions for your consideration this evening, and you may also vote to table, and that concludes staff's presentation on this matter. And the applicant's representative is in attendance and is ready, willing, and able to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions by the commission?
Yes, Commissioner Smith, I have 2. I'm very familiar with this property. I live on South Melendres, and over the years I have watched it, deteriorate. So I was always curious about how and when this property was going to be purchased and used for another purpose. My 2 questions are regarding parking. I know that there are short one space. I see, looking at the plan for parking where they have the drop-off, which is on Melendres, that North Melendres does get, pretty steady traffic. I wouldn't say that it's a residential neighborhood, so it's not fast traffic. So I don't think it's going to be a problem with the drop-off at that location, but I was curious as to why they decided not to have that drop-off on West Mountain, because if you're heading north and you make that turn, the traffic is almost non-existent because you have the field and the recreation area there. So I was just wondering why they decided to put it there. My guess is that that's the front door. There's a sidewalk there, and that's the easiest entry point.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Smith, a couple of things. The drop-off location was located at that location there off Melendres because of the building being the primary building for the operation and its ready access, if you will, from the sidewalk into the property to the front door. Should they relocate that along the Mountain Avenue side, there would be less opportunity for easy access. So some of these individuals would have a certain accessibility or ailments that would prevent easy access to the buildings themselves. We even looked at providing some parking across the way on the park site. There's a parking lot over there, and it's not always at full capacity.
Right,
And
that was actually my second question, if they would be allowed to use basically the overflow parking from that, from the pool and tennis court area.
When we looked into that, it was determined that the park itself, there was a funding mechanism that restricts that. For whatever reason, it's in place. Now, that's not to say that they couldn't use it or someone coming in couldn't park there. I mean, but formally, we couldn't recognize it as overflow or parking through any shared parking agreement. So.
I have no more questions.
Is there anyone else? Commissioner Kaiser?
I'm just curious on the being one spot short on the parking front. Would the applicant be open to just adding 4 additional bike parking spots to make up for that? I mean, this is a perfect location for staff to bike, and it just seems like an easy solution.
Sarah, I think perhaps I have to swear you in.
I believe so.
Okay. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth on the penalty of law?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm Sarah Gonzalez with Legacy Acquisitions, for the record. We would not be opposed to adding the additional bicycle racks, and we've also worked with the adjacent neighbor towards the west side. They have actually also given us permission to utilize any parking we'd need to on their property as well as in front of their property. We contacted them when we were short and said, would there be a problem? Because we, of course, didn't want to impede on their property as the process would go forward if the business does succeed. So they were willing to allow us to also park in front of their property. We just didn't want to, if you notice on the site plan, the ADA striped area is not designated. That's very hard to do when it has to be 8 feet wide. So we didn't want to limit ourselves to not have that opportunity to reduce one if we could. Sitting out on the property and actually counting vehicles, I was the one who did that. You can definitely tell Mountain is definitely the drop-off area. Cars are definitely a lot more on Melendres than opposed to on Mountain. There was rarely any cars that came down Mountain unless they were actually going into the park for the actual park's facilities. Also within the park, you can definitely tell there's a lot of parking lot available. There was a tournament on one day that was taking place in the morning, and then it's vacant a lot of the time. So it was very disappointing to not be able to utilize that, even if it was just for staff, to open up that drop-off area, knowing this is a land use that's definitely needed in Las Cruces.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I am totally fine with 1 fewer parking spots. But if we have an opportunity to put in additional bike parking to make up for that, I think it's a no-brainer on this location.
Is there anyone else? Oh, Sarah, stay there. First of all, I think I would have liked to have seen a floor plan, a proposed floor plan as to what they were going to do in these 2 buildings, especially the connectivity between the 2. For example, are both buildings going to have a facility to provide meals, or only one building and those people in the other building are going to have to go to the other building to have something to eat? How is this all going to work?
Okay, so I do have a presentation that I can provide a little bit more information on. Based on the rear property, as you can see, we've kind of shown them a little bit greater. What's happened is the 2 sites were originally designed to work together. The facilities that are ancillary to the site would be utilized in the smaller building. And I'll show you why the floor plans would work, because this is a 4,500 square foot building with no backyard. So the purpose of 585 is really for the backyard use. So now you can put the barber shop, you can put the massage therapy, and you can put the kitchen into another building that would actually open up the space. What is currently done, this is what the fire department had requested, was the safety plan of the current buildings. And they wanted to primarily look and see how many exits were available for the site. Each property has 3 exits that are available for each one, so that way there is accommodating ways for people to get in and out depending on which room you're in. For 585, there's not as many rooms, but there are at least 2 restrooms and then a kitchen area. Some of the rooms will probably be modified to be opened up, so that way there's more space, because you don't need as much room for activity centers when you have people that are just trying to socialize, just want to be with other people of basically the same mental health maybe. As you can see in 595, we get a lot larger. These bathrooms were already created as ADA since it was done for a group home. It has fire sprinklers already attached inside. That's why it was very difficult to sell this property as a single-family residence. It became more of that commercial use. And so with these floor plans, now you have all of these activity centers that are open spaces. So people can either play chess or they can go outside and garden, but they have areas to where they can basically meet people, possibly with the same condition they may have, or maybe just because they want to get out and socialize. This area worked because it also helped with the park being across the street. What I noticed when I was doing the traffic counts is there was a tennis tournament, and every single one of the members in the tennis tournament were seniors. Not a lot of people know about it. Maybe people can't play, but they'd want to go watch. So it became an accessibility to just get out and still be taken care of, maybe not necessarily by your caregiver, who may need a break. They did a study that I had found. Oh, let's go back to the images. This was actually in 2011. This property looked great. You can see where this has now been enclosed. Here's a window that's been enclosed on 585. There was landscaping. I'm not even sure where the rock went in the front of 595. Like, how do you just pick that up and take it with you? And so now we see these properties looking like this. There's your comparison of what these properties have the potential to be and what it can bring to the neighborhood. When you look at the backyards, these are the backyards. They are just as unkept as before. And so now you have this area where 585 and 595 almost seem like they were supposed to be together. There's already a cutout in the wall. Right here has been cut out so you can walk back there. It's already wide enough to provide anybody who does need ADA services to actually get into the back for the actual gardening. Here is the front area that shows there's an ADA ramp to actually get into the back porch from where you would get it on the side from essentially where you'd have 2 staff members parking, but essentially that other area would be left open in case anybody wanted to get into the back patio. But as you can tell, this is their rear yard. This is the side, goes onto this side, comes up back here, and then goes into the back property. There's no rear yard for anybody to utilize within the space. So making that other backyard, that garden or that sanctuary, that place to just hang out, makes this a more viable project. These are the street views I took at 12 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday. As you can see, there's not very many cars that are actually parked along the street. There were 2 vehicles. This one's mine. There were no vehicles along Mountain, and then these were passing cars. So there's really not a lot of people who are actually using the on-street parking right now, because that is always the concern, is how many people are going to pull out or park and change direction. Melendres can be a faster street. To me, it seems like it's more like a through street. It looks like Campo is how it works. Everybody's just getting from Picacho to Amador and Amador to Maine. That is how that road simply works.
All right, Sarah, thank you, but I do have some other questions. Could you go back to the first picture that you showed with the 2 houses? Go all the way back.
The lovely
right there.
one?
That's far enough. This is just a suggestion, and certainly I wouldn't make it a condition, but it might be a good idea for somehow or other to put some kind of a covered walkway between the 2 buildings if someone has to go from one to the other in inclement weather, if we ever have any, like rain. It's just a suggestion. But now I have another question. What is being provided for those who require very specific care, like, say, someone who might have Alzheimer's?
Okay, let me go ahead and bring up our business owner, who's actually going to be the one running the facility. She can provide more information as well.
Okay. Could you just please give us your name and then let me swear you in?
Certainly. Buffy Johnson.
All right. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth on a penalty of law?
I do.
All right, thank you. So I'm asking you, for example, that requires very, very special needs for someone who is qualified to take care of someone who has Alzheimer's, or perhaps someone who is severely disabled, requires, let's say, an electric wheelchair, who is unfortunately unable to perhaps even feed themselves. Will you have that type of staff?
So this facility is not designed for people with near end stage Alzheimer's. I call it light dementia that we would accept because it is not It's a home, and we're intending for it to look like a home. It is going to be secured, but it is not going to be, they won't be locked in like in a nursing home security unit where they can't get out because the doors are locked. That's not this intention. So I do intend to take light dementia type of clients who are able to converse and socialize. They may forget what room they're in or where they're going, but they're not having severe dementia or Alzheimer's issues. If it comes to that this will probably not be the appropriate place for that client. As far as the wheelchair is concerned, I absolutely anticipate we'll have wheelchairs, walkers, rollators, all of those good things. My staff will be able to do standby assist one-person transfers, where we help them get up and transfer, but we don't deadlift. We won't be able to do that. Currently, I own Homestead Senior Care, and so it'll be very much the same as my clients, except it will be in a group setting so that I can have people who really can't afford or don't want one-to-one care, but they want socialization. They want to go somewhere to have care with caregivers that can provide that. So as the client ages in place, if you will, we'll have to keep a very close eye on the dementia situation because it can be unsafe in certain areas. Luckily, I've been doing this for 30 years, so I feel very qualified to be able to make sure everyone is safe. And it's not a good idea to combine dementia with physically frail. Those are not the same type of people, so we want to keep a very close eye on that. If the demand in the city calls for a more dementia-type daycare, I will be happy to open up a separate one, but I will not combine them because it's just not a very good business plan.
I'm not saying that the city will require it. I mean, what happens if someone, are you going to interview everyone when they come to the front door and say, what is the nature of your elderly person? If they say, well, he has dementia, he has Alzheimer, and I need someone to take care of him during the daytime while I have errands to do, you're going to simply say, I'm really sorry, but we're not equipped to handle it?
Not necessarily. So what my suggestion is going to be that we will have an opportunity for them to come with their loved one and do an observation for about an hour. So my staff can observe them, their family member will be there observing them, so we can see how they're interacting with other people. Some people are not good interactors, and I'm not looking to have anyone in there that's going to stir it up or make it uncomfortable for people. There is a place for that, and this is not that place. So it will be very closely watched and very closely assessed. If it comes to the point where they can't be there, I will have to let them know they can't come anymore.
And I understand, that's fair. What happens if there's a requirement for a special diet?
We could do that.
So you're going to just have like a standard menu and say, this is what we're serving for lunch today? And if somebody would have to tell you in advance if they needed something like a special diet, and you would provide it?
We could. So we'll have an always available menu of, tomato soup, cottage cheese, peaches and, crackers, all the things that people like, the comfort foods, macaroni and cheese, whatnot, grilled cheese, things that will be available always. But if someone's on a low sodium diet or some other type of cardiac diet, we can accommodate that to a reasonable degree.
Okay. And my last question is, does someone have to pay to come here?
Yes.
And how, if they can't pay, how do you handle that?
So it will be initially private pay only, and eventually I will be applying for Medicaid. That is a very lengthy process with our state, so it's not something that will be done right away. But Medicaid does pay for adult daycare in 15-minute increments, if you will. So there's a lot to the application. But it will be private pay initially, and I don't think we'll have any problem filling that up.
Do you have any kind of private funding that sort of makes up the difference?
No.
So you're going to manage to run this place based on the number of people who come and the amount of money you charge to determine your overhead?
Correct.
Oh, good luck.
Oh, well, it'll be great. I've been doing this for a long time. This is my first rodeo, so
Okay.
I think it's going to be wonderful.
All right.
And appreciate your support.
I wish you luck. I think it's a wonderful project, and I think it will serve well. And as long as all these things are taken care of, there should be no problem. Those are my questions. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioner Vega. This is my neighbor, like 2 houses down.
Okay.
I know that we go through this process to get the approvals in place to then start modifying the buildings and doing everything we want to get you approved so that you can create this business. If that doesn't happen, and we've gone through all these approvals on this side, it makes me think of the corner of Main and 70, like how we've talked about the potential for what could happen. But if it doesn't, what could potentially happen to this property if this business does not flourish? I guess I'm thinking about what kind of, commercial opportunities could it turn into?
That's not my.
It can be.
All right, then if there are no other questions,
So if I may.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Mr. Commissioner, Commissioner Vega, or Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Vega, the infill development process, if it gets approved here this evening, with or without conditions, it's valid for a period of time. If all of a sudden the deal falls through, acquisition of the property for whatever reason doesn't take place and the applicant walks away, in most instances, the property will sit idle until someone else comes along and either wants to do something similar or proposes something different, in which case they would be coming back to this body for approval, much like what we're doing this evening. If somebody wanted to occupy the property, and I do recognize that the 595 address, that building is large. It's very large, but if someone wanted a large home, they could certainly do that. They could certainly come and seek infill request for a duplex, for instance, or single family with an attached interior-oriented accessory dwelling, or something along those lines. So it could be utilized much like what it was originally intended for, or they can come back and seek an alternative proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Now, is there anyone else? All right, then, I guess we are ready for a vote. Now, can I have a motion, please?
I make a motion to approve 8.1 with conditions 1 through 3.
I'll second.
Yeah. Did we have a second? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir, we do.
All right, go ahead.
Board Member Kaiser?
Yes, based on staff's recommendation and consistency with Elevate Las Cruces.
Board Member Smith?
Yes, based on staff recommendation, site visit, and I think this is going to be a very good use of this property.
Board Member Bennett?
Yes, based on staff recommendation, site survey, and it meets the IDP.
Board Member Vega?
I vote yes based on site visits. I'm really looking forward to seeing the block brighten up and the street follow, and staff recommendations.
Chair Gordon?
I vote yes based on my site visit, my staff discussion, and their recommendations. It goes with Elevate Las Cruces. It certainly fills an infill problem, and it's going to make a wonderful contribution to the city.
Motion passes.
Okay, then we can go on to item 8.2, which is a special use permit request.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my final case this evening, Vincent Bonegas, interim planner for the record. My final case this evening is a special use permit as indicated for property located at 2505 Missouri Avenue. The current conditions are as follows. The property is zone C1 zoning. That's our low-intensity commercial district or designation. Originally, the property was developed, I believe, as a two-suite retail or service center. I think way back in the day it was a laundromat with either a tailor shop or some clothing component in the smaller portion. And throughout the years, it's transitioned to a variety of uses, some of the latest being a taekwondo, if I'm not mistaken, and a mobile cell phone store. The property is located on the northeast corner of Missouri Avenue and Don Roser Drive and consists of 0.264 acres of land. The surrounding property is primarily retail, office, multifamily, with single-family zoning and uses further north of the subject location. And it is that single-family zoning designation that covers those uses that is in question here this evening pursuant to this SUP. The supporting zoning for those uses includes R1A zoning, again, our single-family medium-density designation, C1, our low-intensity commercial, C2, our medium-intensity, and C3 being our high-intensity. And the C at the end of that C3 just refers to a condition that was provided at the time of the property's rezoning, which is located here. It's a very large tract of land and currently has both office and daycare related businesses on the property, typically in a lease environment. I don't think any of the portions of the property have been formally subdivided. It's all through lease arrangement. So the property in question is situated here at the corner, northeast corner, Don Roser Drive being located here, Missouri Avenue, here. You've got the interstate next to Don Roser, and Delano Drive is here, just a lot over from the subject location, and it's this R1A zoning district, which requires us to consider the SUP this evening. You do have C2 zoning further north of the subject property. In fact, several of these parcels here are office or business office related, some real estate offices, etc. You have a garment or uniform retail establishment here. I believe it's called Scrubs. And you have a restaurant located here in Nopalitos. Now in this property directly kind of northeast of the subject location is an apartment complex. I think it has 6 units and then residential thereafter. So you can see that there's a mix of zoning, several uses, and kind of in the broader scheme of things as it relates to this location. Again, the property aerial view showing what I've described, multifamily here. This photo, though, does show a very good representation of what I consider to be a good physical barrier, if you will, or buffer to the single-family zoning district, which comprises this area where the cursor is pointing out. So you have multifamily, you have other offices here, and so before you get to that single-family zone, you do have other uses that provide perhaps even greater impact to those residential areas. The bulk of that large tract of land, as you see here, is vacant. One of our developers in the city owns that land, and to my knowledge, isn't necessarily interested in subdividing it as much as leasing space or land area to potential businesses. So in terms of history, the building was constructed in 1977, and kind of ironically, the building was constructed on the land, but it was in 2008 as part of the Moncrief subdivision, which created the lot size that we see today. So a little cart before the horse kind of thing going on there, but nonetheless, at the time of construction, the property met all the requirements, development requirements that were in existence. And back then, You didn't have our landscaping ordinance that we see today, things of that nature. So it's kind of a unique setup in terms of parking, in terms of landscaping, which there really isn't any to speak of, and that sort of thing. So I'd like to keep that in mind. The property has been zoned C1 since pre-1970. 1969 serves as our kind of base year by which all our zoning history is based on. The building itself is approximately 96 feet, not quite 100 feet from the R1A zoning district. It's required to be 300 feet, and that's that single-family R1A district that I pointed out. So in terms of the proposal, the applicant who is here in attendance this evening wishes to place a retail cannabis store at the subject location. Again, they're having to meet that 300-foot buffer requirement to the residential zoning, and they fall short by about 2/3 of that distance. All the other distances are being met in terms of other cannabis retailers and or school daycare property. With this proposal, it was kind of a unique situation because we're dealing with that large tract of land and the daycare facility located on more or less on the southeast corner of that large tract. Staff had to consider the issue of the buffer distance more specifically as it relates to leased area, because they don't own the property. The daycare doesn't own the property, they merely lease the property. So if you pull a measurement from the subject proposed cannabis location to that daycare, they're well beyond 300 feet. In fact, they're upwards of about just shy of 700 feet. To that end, we do have support from the daycare manager or director. They were apprised of the issue by the applicant early on, and they did provide the applicant with a letter saying that they were in support of that. So that's a very positive thing for this type of use. Beyond that, the proposed cannabis facility or retail store will follow all other City of Las Cruces requirements and those that are outlined by the state of New Mexico as it relates to cannabis related activity. So here is a photo looking north, but at the south facade of the subject property. Again, a majority of it once upon a time was laundromat, and since then it's changed use. You do see angled parking on site. I think there's been some reconfiguration of driving lanes along Don Roser in Missouri in the form of medians. So access to the property is still gained from Don Roser and from Missouri, but it's a little bit more difficult to get access to it, but accessibility is there. So the applicant may be looking at reconfiguring some of the parking that you see here, but in that this property has been in use without any year lapse in time pursuant to our code, business can continue to operate on the premises. And the cannabis business is just another retail operation in terms of our code, with exception to the fact that there's specific provisions for it. We also have a photo looking east at the western facade of the facility, and you see a little bit of a shared driveway here, which is also utilized by these offices further north of the subject property, but access to the subject property can also take place there. And then along, which isn't shown, but a little bit further off to the slide here is access from Missouri, and I failed to point that out. But at the bottom photo, you have Delano Drive located here, Missouri, of course, being this larger roadway. And this is just showing you the fact that there's multifamily at this location, a uniform retail business here, and that restaurant I pointed out. Beyond that is where you have the single-family uses. So public input was sent to the surrounding properties. And as of 2:45 or so this afternoon, I had not received any input from the surrounding property owners regarding this case, but I did receive one email which I distributed to you all. The gentleman indicated that he was opposing the case, but he was citing concerns as it relates to traffic and some of the traffic issues that they're seeing at the particularly Don Roser and Missouri, but also at Delano and Missouri intersections. To that, staff has already indicated that business activity can continue to occur on the premises following the non-conforming provisions. And so in looking at or getting with our development engineer, it's not likely that the traffic generated by this proposed use is going to be any significant difference from what any other retail, small-scale retail facility might pose. So with that in mind, staff's comfortable pushing forward and recommending what we're recommending here this evening, and that is approval of the case with the findings as follows: that the aside from the single-family zoning district boundaries, all of the other buffer requirements are met. The property was developed under codes that were applicable back in the day, and again, because of non-conforming provisions, they may continue. The subject property is also designed with a relatively high degree of compatibility with other fronting properties along Missouri and Don Roser Drive. And ingress, egress, although somewhat limited, is available from both Missouri and Don Roser. And from staff's perspective, we don't feel that the proposed use will have any significant traffic impacts to the traffic circulation pattern in that area. It certainly meets Section 38.2 of our zoning code, and it also will follow all zoning code and state of New Mexico requirements for the intended use. There were several goals and policies and actions that supported the proposed use. The area is an urban neighborhood place, or within an urban neighborhood place type, which encourages a variety of residential housing, medium to high densities with pockets of commercial uses, which this certainly fits the bill. Mixed-use neighborhoods, expanding economic opportunities, increased employment opportunities, those are the themes of some of the goals and policies and actions that speak to the support element in this case. So with that, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, your options this evening are to vote yes and approve the request. You may vote no and deny it and provide findings of fact that differ from what I've provided, and vote yes with conditions, or vote to table. And that concludes staff's presentation this evening.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions from the commission?
So I just had a question with the fire department and the contingency that it put in place there, the Knox box required outside the front door. So there's no other thing in the report that has anything about that. So I just wanted to inquire if it wasn't necessary, or...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Bennett, the Knox box is an element that is required of all cannabis-related facilities. It's literally, it's a product and a brand, and there's only limited options that our fire department allows to be used for cannabis, and it basically stores a key that only the fire department can access in case of fire or some other medical emergency in which they have to access the premises quickly. Because there are security measures in place that lock the doors and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner Kaiser?
Yeah, in the staff report, you talked a little bit about the total square footage. I believe at one point you stated the total square footage of the building is just shy of 3,200 square feet. But then I guess there is a cap on the square footage that they are allowed to use, which is 2,500 square feet. Can you talk a little bit about that requirement and how exactly that would be enforced?
So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, that is an issue that I've talked with the applicant about. And in review of the plans that were submitted and with the information provided by the applicant, we have in our zoning code at present a cap of square footage for any single business at the 2,500, I believe that's the correct one, 2,500 square foot limit. The building is larger than that, but in talking with the applicant, they are not looking to utilize the additional square footage immediately, but certainly when they submit plans for any interior improvements, that kind of thing, any interior walls, any electrical permits, that type of thing, that's when we are able to look at those plans and ensure that they are compliant with the C1 provisions for square footage. The applicant was informed that in the future, as the business grows, if they wish to utilize that square footage, they're likely looking at a zone change to C2. That would eliminate any of that square footage cap.
So would the requirement be that they have to build interior partition? Or how exactly would we enforce that 2,500 square feet in a building that's 3,200 square feet?
At present, with any permit activity, we would have to note on the plans that that additional space is vacant or unutilized, and there's an opportunity at the time of business registration issuance, and through that process, staff is on hand to ensure that that added square footage is not being used. And at any point in time, they're subject to city staff gaining access to the property and taking a look. So there's nothing that would require a built wall to separate the space, but they would be looked at on a fairly regular basis to ensure that didn't happen.
Okay, so it's essentially the honor code here. I mean, does staff have the resources to enforce? I mean, are there other examples in the city where this is a similar issue? Because to me, it seems like the easiest thing to do is you've got to petition it, because, I mean, if that space over there in the corner is open, I'm certainly going to start stacking stuff there.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, do we have the resources to routinely visit the site? No. What we could do is kind of place the applicant on the spot and see whether or not he is willing to provide a wall, not necessarily anything substantial, but a wall separating that space from his usable space.
Yeah, I don't think I need any formal commitment. I think I'm good with the honor system. I just want to put that on the record that there's an honor system here. I guess along those lines, if they do expand eventually down the road, that triggers that rezoning, would that then trigger full compliance with the current development standards that are in place, since this is a currently non-conforming use, or how would that play out?
The non-conforming provisions, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, the non-conforming provisions, the requirement to comply is triggered with use increases. So let's say that intensity of use increases on the subject property beyond which the limits of the building allow for. Keep in mind that 2 businesses occupied this site, And right now, one would occupy it, but even if they utilize that additional square footage, that wouldn't trigger compliance-related issues. It was if they expanded in any way, shape, or form the physical boundaries of that building to a 10%, I believe is the threshold, then they would be required to comply. The other mechanisms for compliance is, if things didn't work out and the applicant found another property that was more suitable for his needs, if this property sat vacant for a year or greater, then the next person coming in would trigger the need for compliance with landscaping, everything.
Okay, I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how exceeding the 2,500 square foot threshold isn't increasing the intensity of the use.
In terms, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Kaiser, in terms of the individual use, it is increasing, but in terms of the historical use of the building as a whole, it's not increasing because you had full use of the building for the duration of its life.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nichols, you have something to say?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Larry Nichols, Community Development, for the record. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Kaiser, regarding your question regarding how would we assure that that 2,500 square foot was in place and stayed in place. To begin, once the business registration is issued, we have two inspections. We have an inspection by the building department and an inspection by the fire department. And they would assure that the building is according to the plans that were presented. And then after that, the fire department does annual inspections on all commercial buildings, and they would check it at that time as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
All right, are there any other questions? I'll let Mr. Benegas speak to the applicant. We have a discussion going on there. Is there something you wish to add, Vince?
If I could, in talking with the applicant briefly, there is a wall that separates those two spaces. There is a door within that wall, but again, in part, it's partly honor system, but he is well aware of the need to comply with the square footage requirement.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. So if there are no further questions, I think we might be ready to vote. Can I get a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Board Member Kaiser?
Yes, based on staff's recommendation and consistency with Elevate Las Cruces.
Board Member Smith?
Yes, based on staff recommendation, site visit, and also it meets neighborhood character and compatibility.
Board Member Bennett?
Yes, based on staff recommendation and site survey.
Board Member Vega?
Yes, based on site visit and staff recommendation.
Chair Gordon?
I vote yes, based on staff recommendations, my site visit, and Elevate Las Cruces, and it'll be just another retail establishment opening here in the city. So thank you.
Motion passes. Thank you.
All right, then that takes care of our business for the evening. Is there anybody on the commission who would like to speak on anything? If not, is there any staff announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Larry Nichols for the record. Just a brief staff announcement. The city staff and the planning division and the community development wishes all of the commission a pleasant holiday, the 4th of July coming up, and to also inform you that all of the issues that you've been considering over the last several months, the development is very active in the community. Several of the subdivisions are filling out. We're getting new applications and submittals each day. Obviously, those come before you. But we're still on this, what I call a exponential growth pattern that has been going on now for about 2.5 years. But a lot of that work and that growth, positive growth, can be attributed to the contribution you make, and thank you very much.
Okay, in that case, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion to adjourn.
A second?
I second.
I think we're all in favor, we adjourn.